Today, we explore 6 horrible wedding deaths ever recorded, from a wedding bouquet toss where something heavy came down instead, to a safari-themed wedding where an unexpected guest from the wild ended the celebration in the most terrifying way possible. It was June 7th, 2019, at an open-air estate venue outside San Juan, Puerto Rico. The reception had entered its final hour. The terrace overlooked a wide valley, and guests had gathered near the edge for the bouquet toss. The air had been still most of the evening, warm and steady, with only a light breeze moving through the trees. Cassandra Ellis was 26 years old. She worked as a pediatric nurse in Houston and had grown up alongside the bride, Layla. They were first cousins, raised in the same neighborhood and attending the same church. Cassandra had originally agreed to serve as a bridesmaid, but stepped down 3 months earlier when her hospital rotation schedule changed. She kept the dress anyway and wore it that night, standing just outside the bridal party as the reception moved toward its close. Family members later said she had spent most of the evening moving between tables, checking on older relatives, making sure everyone had water and a seat. She rarely stayed in one place for long. The videographer had hired an independent drone operator to capture overhead footage of the reception. The multi-rotor drone had been flying intermittently throughout the evening, used for wide shots of the terrace and sunset. During an earlier test pass, it briefly dropped several feet before stabilizing. The operator replaced the battery and resumed flying. When the bouquet toss was announced, Cassandra stepped closer to the center of the terrace with a group of cousins. Guests packed tightly together, faces tilted upward, phones raised. The drone lifted to approximately 30 feet above the crowd and held position. Cassandra stood near the front, slightly to the right of the bride. She looked up once at the drone, then back toward Layla as the bouquet was raised. The wind shifted just as the bouquet left the bride's hands. Investigators later determined the replacement battery had not fully latched into place. When a gust struck the drone's frame, power disconnected and the motors stopped. The aircraft dropped without resistance. Witnesses described seeing it fall, but not processing what was happening until it was too late. The drone descended directly over Cassandra's position, rotating slightly before striking the top of her head. The impact forced her straight down to the stone terrace. She made no sound and did not attempt to brace. For a moment, the crowd continued cheering. The music did not stop immediately. Then the space around her opened as people stepped back. Cassandra lay on her back, eyes partially open, unresponsive. The drone came to rest several feet away, 2 propeller arms broken against the stone. Emergency services were called within minutes. Family members remained near her while staff cleared the terrace. First responders documented severe head trauma and began resuscitation efforts on site. She had no detectable pulse and was not breathing. CPR continued as she was prepared for air transport. Cassandra Ellis was pronounced dead at 11:17 p.m. at a hospital in San Juan. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be traumatic brain injury resulting from blunt force impact to the crown of the skull. Federal aviation authorities opened an investigation into the drone operation, including compliance with Part 107 regulations governing flight over people and pre-flight inspection procedures. The venue temporarily suspended events while the inquiry proceeded. No mechanical defect was identified in the aircraft itself. Investigators concluded that improper battery seating caused the mid-air power loss. It was September 14, 2017, at a private safari camp on the western edge of the Serengeti in Tanzania. The ceremony deck had been built along a natural ridge overlooking open grassland. Lanterns marked the event perimeter in a wide arc, and guests were briefed upon arrival to remain inside the boundary at all times. 2 armed rangers were assigned to the event. A third was scheduled to return from the nearby airstrip with late arrivals before sunset. Daniel Marsh, 34, had traveled from Portland, Oregon, where he worked as a structural engineer for a mid-sized infrastructure firm. He had known the groom for nearly a decade, first meeting during a conservation internship in Kenya. Friends described Daniel as methodical and outdoors-oriented, someone comfortable in field environments. He had volunteered to give the evening toast and spent much of the flight reviewing notes for it. The location had personal meaning for him. Years earlier, he had spoken often about the Serengeti at dusk and had encouraged the groom to visit East Africa at least once. Cocktail hour began shortly before sunset. Staff circulated drinks along the deck while guests moved between the bar and the ridge overlook. A ranger remained positioned near the lantern line, scanning the grass beyond the perimeter with binoculars. Visibility gradually decreased as the sun lowered and long shadows from the ridge extended into the grassland. Daniel stepped away from the main group while on his phone. According to witness accounts, he paced as he spoke, moving along the edge of the lantern boundary. At one section of the ridge, the ground dipped slightly beyond the marked line, creating a shallow slope that reduced visibility from the deck. Surveillance footage later showed Daniel crossing past that dip and continuing approximately 100 feet beyond the lantern line, placing himself outside the secured area. He remained within sight of lodge lights, but outside direct ranger supervision. At approximately 7:42 p.m., the ranger stationed near the boundary reported movement in the grass east of the perimeter. Before he could issue a warning, guests near the deck heard a sudden impact sound, followed by a shout. Daniel was knocked forward and fell out of view into the grass. The ranger's radio transmission alerted other staff immediately. Handheld spotlights were directed toward the area within seconds. A lioness was briefly visible, moving away from Daniel's position before disappearing into taller grass. Rangers advanced cautiously while maintaining visual coverage of the surroundings. Daniel was found face down, approximately 105 feet beyond the marked boundary. He was unresponsive and bleeding from wounds to the neck and upper shoulder region. Lodge emergency staff began treatment immediately while coordinating an air evacuation from the nearby airstrip. Rangers applied direct pressure to visible wounds and monitored his airway. Significant blood loss was noted. CPR was initiated when pulses became difficult to detect. An aircraft arrived shortly after and transported him to a hospital in Arusha. Daniel Marsh was pronounced dead at 9:41 p.m. The medical report determined the cause of death to be severe blood loss resulting from penetrating neck injuries consistent with a lion attack. Tanzanian wildlife authorities conducted a review of the incident. Officials concluded that Daniel had moved beyond the designated safety perimeter at dusk, placing himself within active wildlife territory. No evidence suggested malfunction or ranger negligence. Following the incident, the camp suspended all private events indefinitely and revised perimeter enforcement policies to require continuous escort for guests during low-light hours. It was the evening of Saturday, October 6, 2018, outside a banquet hall in Atlanta, Georgia. The reception had ended shortly after 11 p.m. Guests filtered into the parking lot in small groups, retrieving coats from vehicles and saying extended goodbyes near the entrance doors. The lot held approximately 50 spaces arranged in 3 narrow rows with a single travel lane down the center. 2 overhead light fixtures illuminated the area. Staff later reported that one of the lights had been flickering intermittently for several weeks. Evelyn Marsh was 63 years old. She had traveled from Savannah 2 days before the ceremony to assist with preparations. A retired school librarian, she had spent the morning arranging centerpieces and the afternoon coordinating seating changes. Throughout the reception, she moved between tables, helping elderly relatives locate seats and keeping children occupied during speeches. Family members described her as steady and attentive, often placing herself where she was most useful. When the reception ended, she exited through the main doors to wait near the curb for her nephew to bring the car forward. Vehicle traffic in the lot was unstructured. Guests departed at different times, some pulling forward, others reversing from tight spaces. There was no attendant directing flow after 10 p.m. Several vehicles in the rear rows required multi-point turns to exit. Evelyn walked along the edge of the central travel lane, staying close to parked cars to avoid moving traffic. At approximately 11:18 p.m., a guest parked 3 rows back entered his sedan and started the engine. Surveillance footage later reviewed by investigators showed the vehicle's reverse lights activate as he shifted into reverse. The space behind him was partially obstructed by 2 larger SUVs parked on either side, limiting his rear visibility. As he began backing out, his steering angle caused the rear of the sedan to swing wider than expected, ejected into the central lane. Witnesses stated that Evelyn stepped from between two parked vehicles into the travel lane at the same moment the sedan was reversing. The lighting in that section of the lot was uneven due to the flickering overhead fixture. The driver continued backing at a steady pace, consistent with normal parking lot movement. There was no evidence of sudden acceleration. The rear bumper struck Evelyn at hip height, knocking her backward onto the pavement. Her head struck the asphalt as she fell. The vehicle continued moving for several feet before bystanders shouted and motioned for the driver to stop. He applied the brakes and exited the vehicle immediately. Several guests reached Evelyn within seconds. She was lying on her back and not responding. Someone called 911 while others directed traffic away from the scene. The driver remained on site. Paramedics arrived approximately 6 minutes after the call. Evelyn was unresponsive with no detectable pulse at the scene. She was transported to a local hospital where resuscitation efforts continued in the trauma bay. She was pronounced dead at 1:09 a.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma, consistent with pedestrian impact and secondary head injury from striking the pavement. Toxicology reports showed no alcohol or impairing substances in the driver's system. Investigators concluded that limited rear visibility, uneven lighting, and failure to adequately check surroundings while reversing were contributing factors. The driver was cited for improper backing and failure to exercise due care. No criminal charges were filed. Following the incident, the venue replaced the malfunctioning light fixture and reviewed parking lot lighting coverage. It was September 12, 2015, at a historic hotel in Charleston, South Carolina. The ballroom occupied the second floor, with additional seating on the third. The only operational elevator in the building dated back to 1911, restored but original in structure, with a posted limit of 4 passengers or 800 pounds. Staff reminded guests of the limit throughout the evening. Marcus Hale was 31 years old. He worked as a project coordinator for a logistics firm in Colombia and had debated skipping the reception because of the drive. The groom had called him personally a week earlier and asked him to give a toast. They had started at the company the same month and had eaten lunch together nearly every workday for 6 years. Marcus rewrote his speech 3 times that morning. He drove to Charleston alone and arrived just before the ceremony began. By 9:45 p.m., the reception had split across floors. The stairs connecting them were narrow and steep. Guests who had been drinking for several hours began gathering near the elevator instead. The car moved slowly, taking nearly a minute to travel between floors. A line formed in the lobby. Marcus stood with 4 co-workers near the front of the queue. Someone ahead mentioned the wait could be 20 minutes. When the gate slid open, 4 guests stepped out. Marcus looked inside. The car was small but not cramped. He stepped in first. 2 co-workers followed. Another hesitated, then entered. A 5th squeezed in as the gate closed. 6 total. There was no overload sensor on the control panel, only the posted weight limit on the wall behind them. The gate latched, and the elevator began its slow ascent. The ascent was slower than before. Marcus felt the vibration through the soles of his shoes. At roughly 8 feet above the lobby floor, the car jolted. The motor strained audibly. Then the elevator stopped without warning. The abrupt stop threw the occupants backward as the car shuddered against the guide rails. Marcus, who had been standing near the rear corner, struck the back wall and then collapsed to the floor as the elevator settled into place. The lights flickered but did not go out. One co-worker slid down the side panel, stunned, while another steadied himself against the railing. The car hung suspended between floors, the lobby ceiling visible through the gap below the doors. Someone tried to force the gate open, but it would not move. The car hung between floors. Marcus lay on his back, eyes open but unfocused. Blood was visible beneath his head where it had struck the floor. Hotel staff were alerted immediately, and emergency services were called at 9:58 p.m. A manager arrived at the shaft door below and called upward to ask if anyone was injured. 5 voices answered. Marcus did not. Firefighters accessed the car from above, opening the ceiling hatch and lifting the occupants out one at a time. Marcus was removed last. CPR was initiated before he was fully transferred from the shaft and continued en route to a local hospital. Despite sustained resuscitation efforts, Marcus Hale was pronounced dead at 11:52 p.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be severe head and cervical spine trauma resulting from blunt impact during the abrupt elevator stop. Investigators concluded that the elevator had exceeded its posted weight capacity at the time of the incident. The emergency braking mechanism functioned as designed, halting the ascent under strain, but the sudden stop caused occupants to lose balance within the confined space. The hotel temporarily suspended elevator operations pending inspection. Civil litigation followed. No criminal charges were filed. It was the evening of Saturday, July 12, 2014, outside a private event venue along Route 7 in Harlan County, Kentucky. The reception had been underway for nearly 2 hours. The venue lights ended at the edge of the gravel lot, and beyond them, the road was unlit and narrow, bordered by brush, shallow drainage ditches, and uneven shoulders. Music from inside carried faintly into the warm night air. Nora Callahan was 28 years old. She worked as a pharmacy technician in Nashville and rarely missed important events for the people she cared about. She had met the bride during their freshman year of college, and the two had remained close long after graduation. Nora was often the one who stepped in when energy dipped, organizing group trips, planning birthday surprises, making sure photographs were taken before the night ended. At the reception, she moved easily between the dance floor and the tables, laughing with relatives she had met only hours earlier. When someone mentioned the old local tradition of temporarily kidnapping the bride for a short ride, Nora immediately leaned into the idea. It was meant to be playful theater. When the bride hesitated mid-conversation with her grandmother, Nora offered to take her place. She raised her hand as if volunteering for a stage role. A ribbon from the gift table was tied across her eyes as a blindfold. Guests near the entrance cheered as she allowed herself to be guided toward a pickup truck waiting at the edge of the lot. 5 people entered the vehicle: the driver and 3 longtime friends of the groom, with Nora in the rear seat. The truck, a 2009 Ford F-150, pulled onto Route 7. Music played loudly through the speakers. Windows were down. Inside the cab, conversation overlapped with laughter. Nora, still blindfolded, asked where they were going and whether the groom would believe the performance. None of the occupants were focused on the road for long. The driver had been drinking steadily since late afternoon. Later testing would show his blood alcohol concentration measured 0.14. He had driven Route 7 many times and believed he knew its turns instinctively. Approximately half a mile from the venue, the road curved sharply to the left. The reflective marker indicating the bend was partially obscured by overgrowth. There were no streetlights beyond the venue entrance. The truck approached the curve at a speed investigators later determined was unsafe for the roadway conditions. As the driver recognized the bend, he braked abruptly and turned the steering wheel left. The sudden deceleration shifted weight onto the front tires while reducing traction at the rear. The truck's rear end began to slide. The vehicle crossed the center line briefly before drifting off the right shoulder. The front tires struck the embankment at an angle, lifting the passenger side and initiating a rollover. The truck rotated once before landing upside down in a drainage ditch. Glass shattered outward. 2 passengers unbuckled and exited through broken windows. The driver crawled out moments later. Nora remained in the rear seat. She had not been wearing a seatbelt. The blindfold ribbon was still partially tied across her eyes. A passing motorist came upon the overturned vehicle and called 911. Emergency responders arrived approximately 9 minutes later. Nora was extricated from the truck and CPR was initiated at the roadside before transport to a nearby hospital. She was pronounced dead at 11:18 p.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the chest and head sustained during the rollover. Investigators concluded that alcohol impairment and excessive speed were primary contributing factors. No mechanical defects were found in the vehicle. The driver was later charged with second-degree manslaughter. The 3 surviving passengers were treated for non-life-threatening injuries and released. It was the evening of Saturday, May 20th, 2017, at an event hall in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The reception had moved into its third hour. The open bar had been active since shortly after dinner service ended. Guests rotated between the dance floor and the courtyard, where a decorative stone fountain sat at the center of a square brick patio. The fountain's raised edge measured approximately 18 inches high and ran in a continuous circular rim. Moisture collected along the stone surface as humidity settled over the property. Ryan Bossier, 31, had arrived from Houston the day before. He worked as a civil engineer for a mid-sized firm, primarily handling municipal drainage and roadway projects. Colleagues later described him as cautious by nature, known for double-checking site measurements and avoiding unnecessary risk. He had known the grooms since their second year at university, where they studied in the same program and shared several upper-level courses. After graduation, they remained in regular contact, traveling for major life events. Former classmates had gathered around him for most of the evening. Staff later stated that the group did not appear aggressive or disruptive, though several had been served multiple rounds. Bar receipts showed a steady shift from beer to liquor after 8:30 p.m. Shortly after 9 p.m., several members of the group stepped outside to the courtyard. Surveillance footage later reviewed by investigators showed Ryan climbing onto the fountain's stone edge, while others remained seated. His arms were extended slightly from his sides, maintaining balance as he faced the group. The stone surface reflected light from below, indicating dampness. At 9:17 p.m., his right foot shifted backward. His heel lost traction against the condensation on the stone rim. The footage showed no attempt to sit or brace. His center of gravity moved behind his base of support, and he fell backward. The back of his head struck the raised stone edge before his body continued downward to the brick pavement. He remained motionless for several seconds. Witnesses reported that he appeared to be breathing normally. No blood was immediately visible in the low courtyard lighting. His chest rose and fell at a steady pace. Those nearby assumed he had fallen intentionally or was briefly stunned. No emergency call was made at that time. For approximately 8 minutes, he remained on the ground. Surveillance showed 2 individuals stepping around him to re-enter the hall. At 9:25 p.m., one of the group crouched beside him and attempted to wake him. His eyes were partially open. His breathing had slowed and become irregular. At that point, someone ran inside to alert staff, and 911 was called. Emergency medical services arrived within minutes. Responders documented severe head trauma and decreasing respiratory effort. He was transported to a local hospital. Despite intervention, Ryan Bossier was pronounced dead at 12:44 a.m. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be traumatic brain injury resulting from blunt impact to the occipital region of the skull. His blood alcohol content measured 0.21. No criminal charges were filed. In the weeks that followed, the venue applied non-slip coating to the fountain stone perimeter and revised event safety procedures regarding alcohol monitoring in outdoor areas. Thank you for watching. Like this video, subscribe for more.